The Blind Date by Janson Davies. Chapter 1. Not Forgotten. The scent of lavender lingered in the folds of Mary Ann Palmer's favorite sweater, tucked neatly in the linen closet behind a stack of unused towels. Jim Palmer hadn't touched it in 4 years, not since the funeral, not since the world had tilted off its axis and left him orbiting grief like a moon tethered to a vanished planet. His daughter Teresa was 5 when Mary Ann died. Now 9, she had grown into a quiet, perceptive child, with eyes that seemed to see through people and into the spaces they tried to hide. She didn't cry about her mother anymore, not because she didn't miss her, but because she had learned to carry the absence like a backpack, heavy but manageable. Jim taught science at the local junior college. His lectures were precise, his grading meticulous, but his heart wasn't in the classroom. It lived in the garage where he had built a makeshift astrophysics lab from salvaged parts and old grant equipment. There, among coils and wires and the soft hum of machinery, he tinkered with a microwave telescope he'd designed in graduate school. A project that had once promised a future in research, but now served as a distraction from the past. He didn't expect the telescope to work. Not really. It was more ritual than ambition. Each evening, after dinner, he'd retreat to the garage, adjust a dial, scribble a note, stare into the void. It was his way of talking to Mary Ann without words. Teresa often sat nearby, cross-legged on the concrete floor, watching him work. She understood more than he realized. Her mind was agile, intuitive. She saw the telescope not just as a machine, but as a bridge, one that might reach beyond grief, beyond Earth. Their relationship was rare. They spoke of stars and atoms, of loneliness and memory. Jim didn't shield her from his sorrow. He let her see it, raw and unvarnished. And in return, she offered him something he hadn't expected: hope. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the garage filled with the golden hush of twilight, Teresa asked a question that would change everything. "Dad," she said, "do you think you'll ever fall in love again?" Jim paused, his hand resting on the telescope's control panel. "I don't think such a woman exists," he said softly. "Not anywhere on Earth." Teresa didn't laugh. She didn't tease. She simply nodded, as if filing the phrase away like a hypothesis waiting to be tested. And somewhere, deep in the folds of her young heart, a plan began to form. Chapter 2. The Telescope and the Girl. The garage was a cathedral of quiet ambition, shelves lined with soldering irons, circuit boards, and dusty textbooks formed a kind of altar to curiosity. In the center stood the telescope, Jim's creation, his companion, his confessor. It was a strange-looking thing, cobbled together from microwave components, satellite dishes, and a repurposed radio transmitter. It didn't look like it should work, but it did, in its own way. Teresa had grown up in its shadow. While other children played with dolls or built forts, she sat beside the telescope, sketching its parts, tracing the flow of energy through its wires. She didn't just understand it. She felt it, the way it pulsed with possibility, the way it seemed to listen. Jim never discouraged her. He saw her aptitude early, the way she grasped concepts that baffled his college students. But he didn't push. He let her explore, let her ask questions, let her be the kind of child Mary Ann would have adored. Sometimes, late at night, Teresa would sneak into the garage and sit in the dark, watching the stars through the open roof hatch. She imagined them as eyes, watching, waiting, wondering. She believed the universe was listening. She believed it could answer. The telescope had a transmitter, one Jim had never fully tested. It was designed to send microwave signals into deep space, a kind of cosmic whisper. He'd built it as a theoretical exercise, never expecting a reply. But Teresa had other ideas. She began studying the transmitter's interface, decoding its logic, mapping its frequencies. She read Jim's notebooks, absorbing his theories like bedtime stories. She learned how to adjust the modulation, how to amplify the signal, how to speak in pulses and waves. She didn't tell Jim. Not yet. She wasn't ready. Instead, she waited. She listened. And she remembered his words. "I don't think such a woman exists, not anywhere on earth." It wasn't sadness that drove her. It was love. A child's love, pure, unfiltered, and fiercely determined. She didn't want to replace her mother. She wanted to heal her father. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a question began to form. What if the woman he needed wasn't on Earth? Chapter 3. Conversations at Dusk. The backyard was bathed in the soft orange glow of early evening. Jim stood at the grill, flipping veggie burgers with the precision of a man who found comfort in routine. Teresa sat at the picnic table, her chin resting on her hands, watching the smoke curl upward like questions without answers. They had these dinners every Saturday. Just the two of them. No guests, no distractions. It was their ritual, a small island of normalcy in a sea of quiet grief. Jim poured lemonade into two mismatched glasses. "Extra ice," he said, sliding one toward her. Teresa smiled. "Thanks, Dad." They ate in silence for a while, the kind that wasn't awkward but familiar, the kind that said everything without needing words. Then Teresa spoke. "Do you ever get lonely?" Jim paused, the spatula hovering mid-air. He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he stared at the grill, watching the flames flicker. "Sometimes," he said, "mostly at night." Teresa nodded. "I think Mom would want you to be happy." Jim's jaw tightened. "I know." "She wouldn't want you to be alone forever." He sighed and sat down beside her. "Teresa, it's not that simple." "Why not?" He looked at her then. Really looked. Her eyes were steady, unafraid, so much like Marianne's. "I've talked to women at the college, other teachers. No one really interests me," he said quietly. Teresa didn't flinch. She didn't tease or laugh. She simply absorbed the words as if they were data points in a larger equation. "What if you're looking in the wrong place?" she asked. Jim chuckled. "You mean like Mars?" "Maybe not Mars," she said, "but somewhere." He shook his head, amused and bewildered. "You're something else, kid." Teresa smiled, but inside something had shifted. The hypothesis was forming. The variables were aligning. Her father had given her the answer. He just didn't know it yet. That night, as Jim washed dishes and Teresa dried them, the stars began to rise above the horizon. And in the quiet space between them, a plan began to take shape. Chapter 4. The Message. The house was asleep. Jim had gone to bed early, worn out from grading lab reports, and the emotional weight of another Saturday dinner. Teresa waited until she heard the soft creak of his bedroom door closing, then tiptoed down the hallway, barefoot and silent. She carried a flashlight, a notebook, and a small pendant that had belonged to her mother, a silver star on a thin chain. She wore it like armor. The garage was cool and quiet, lit only by the moonlight spilling through the roof hatch. The telescope stood in the center, humming faintly, as if it sensed her presence. Teresa approached it with reverence. She had studied its components for months, memorized its interface, decoded its logic. She knew how to activate the transmitter, how to modulate the signal, how to speak in its language. She opened her notebook and began to read. "Hello. My name is Teresa Palmer. I'm 9 years old. I live on Earth in a small town with my dad. His name is Jim. He's a science teacher. He's kind and smart and funny, but he's also sad. My mom died 4 years ago. Her name was Marianne. She was beautiful and gentle and loved the stars." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. My dad still talks about her. He misses her every day. He doesn't think he'll ever love anyone again. He says there's no one out there for him, not on Earth. She adjusted the frequency, amplifying the signal. I think he's wrong. I think maybe someone out there is listening, someone who understands him, someone who's kind and curious and brave, someone who loves nature and science and quiet conversations. She paused, then added, He's scared to move on, but he's ready, even if he doesn't know it. Teresa spoke for over 2 hours. She described her father's favorite books, his love of hiking, the way he still set 3 plates at dinner. She talked about their backyard dinners, their telescope sessions, their shared grief and laughter. She ended with a whisper. If you're out there, and you'd like to go on a date with my dad, I think he'd say yes. Eventually. She closed the notebook and pressed the transmit button. The telescope pulsed, sending her message into the cosmos, a beam of emotion encoded in microwave frequencies stretching across the void. Teresa sat beside the telescope until dawn, watching the stars fade into morning. She didn't know if anyone would hear her, but she believed. And sometimes, belief was enough to change everything. Chapter 5. The Silence. The week passed like any other. Jim taught his classes, graded papers, and tinkered with the telescope, unaware that its transmitter had been used for something far more personal than particle readings. He noticed a few calibration shifts, but chalked them up to his own fatigue. Teresa said nothing. She simply watched, waited, and listened. Each night she sat by her bedroom window, scanning the stars. She didn't know what she was looking for. Maybe a flicker, maybe a sign, maybe nothing at all. But she believed that was enough. Jim, meanwhile, had returned to his quiet routines. He grilled on Saturday, folded laundry on Sunday, and spent his evenings in the garage. He hadn't mentioned their conversation again, but Teresa could tell something had shifted. He lingered longer in the backyard. He stared at the sky more often. He seemed open. Then came the next Saturday. The grill was hot, the lemonade was cold, and the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. Teresa set the table with mismatched plates and paper napkins. Jim flipped burgers, humming a tune he couldn't quite remember the words to. It was peaceful, familiar, until the sky changed. At first, it was subtle, a shimmer, a distortion, like heat rising from asphalt. Then the air grew still. The birds stopped singing. The wind held its breath. Teresa looked up. A massive ship descended from the clouds, its surface gleaming like marble, surrounded by smaller vessels that hovered like sentinels. The sky pulsed with quiet energy, and the ground beneath them vibrated with a low, resonant hum. Jim dropped the spatula. The central ship opened, revealing a platform bathed in soft blue light. From it emerged a tall, regal figure, an alien woman with luminous skin, eyes like twin moons, and a presence that made the air feel electric. She stepped forward, graceful and composed. I am Queen Ariona of Juris, she said, her voice melodic and clear. I received your daughter's invitation. Jim turned to Teresa, stunned. You did what? Teresa stood, heart pounding. I sent a message about you, about us. Jim stared at her, torn between disbelief and awe. Teresa, you can't just... She answered, Dad, Teresa said softly. She came. Queen Ariona smiled. I would be honored to join you for dinner. Jim blinked. Do you eat meat? I do. He gestured to the table, still dazed. Then, welcome to Earth. Teresa pulled out a chair for the Queen. Jim poured her a glass of lemonade with trembling hands. And as the stars began to rise, the 3 of them sat down to eat. 2 humans and 1 visitor from a distant world. It wasn't a diplomatic summit. It wasn't a scientific breakthrough. It was a blind date. Chapter 6. The Queen and the Grill. The backyard had never felt so small. Queen Ariona sat at the picnic table, her posture regal but relaxed, her luminous skin catching the last rays of sunlight like polished pearl. The smaller ships hovered silently above, maintaining a respectful distance. Teresa had insisted they stay for dinner, and Jim, still in shock, hadn't found the words to refuse. He handed Ariona a plate with a burger, slightly overcooked. "I wasn't expecting royalty," he said, trying to sound casual. "I wasn't expecting Earth cuisine," she replied, examining the burger with curiosity. "But it smells intriguing." She took a bite. Jim watched, half expecting her to recoil. Instead, she chewed thoughtfully and nodded. "Savory, slightly charred. I approve." Teresa beamed. "Dad makes the best burgers in the neighborhood." Jim cleared his throat. "So, Queen Ariona, you received the message?" "I did," she said. "It arrived encoded in a microwave frequency, rarely used for interstellar communication. Primitive but heartfelt. Your daughter's transmission was unlike anything we've encountered. It was emotional." Jim glanced at Teresa, who shrugged. "I just told the truth." Ariona turned to Jim. "She spoke of your grief, your love for your late wife, your reluctance to move forward. She spoke of your kindness, your curiosity, your quiet strength." Jim looked down at his plate. "She shouldn't have done that." "She did it out of love," Ariona said gently, "and because she believed someone might be listening." Jim sighed. "I didn't think anyone was." Ariona smiled. "You were wrong." They ate in silence for a while, the kind that wasn't awkward but new. Jim found himself studying her, not her alien features, but her expressions, her cadence, the way she listened. She wasn't just a visitor. She was present. Teresa watched them, her heart full. She hadn't summoned a miracle. She'd opened a door. Jim leaned back in his chair. "So, this is a blind date?" Ariona nodded. "In a sense, though I did receive a rather detailed briefing." Jim chuckled. "Not this far out there," he muttered. Teresa grinned. "You said she didn't exist anywhere on Earth. You didn't say anything about the rest of the galaxy." Jim shook his head, smiling despite himself. "You're something else, kid." Ariona raised her glass of lemonade. "To blind dates." Jim clinked his glass against hers. "To unexpected transmissions." And as the stars blinked overhead, the backyard became a place of first contact, not between species, but between hearts. Chapter 7. Common Ground. The stars had come out in full, scattered across the sky like spilled salt. The smaller ships hovered silently above, their lights dimmed to avoid disrupting the mood. The backyard, once just a patch of grass and gravel, now felt like the center of the universe. Jim and Queen Ariona sat side by side at the picnic table, their plates empty, their glasses half full. Teresa had gone inside to fetch dessert, chocolate chip cookies, slightly burnt, her specialty. Jim leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes scanning the sky. "So, what's Juris like?" Ariona followed his gaze. "It's a planet of oceans and floating cities. Our technology is advanced, but our hearts are still fragile. We live long lives, but we grieve deeply." Jim turned to her. "You've lost someone?" Ariona nodded. "My consort, centuries ago. He was a philosopher, quiet, thoughtful. He believed the stars were sentient." Jim smiled faintly. "Sounds like someone I'd get along with." "He would have liked you," she said. "You carry your grief with grace." Jim looked down. "I don't know about grace, I just carry it." Ariona studied him. "You haven't let go." "I don't think I'm supposed to." No, she agreed, but you are allowed to grow around it. They sat in silence, the kind that felt like a shared blanket. Jim found himself relaxing, not because she was alien, but because she wasn't trying to fix him. She was simply there. Teresa returned with cookies and set them down with a flourish. "They're a little crispy," she said, "but they're edible." Ariona picked one up and took a bite. "Delightfully imperfect," Jim laughed. "That's her signature style." Teresa sat between them, her eyes darting from one to the other. "So, how's the date going?" Jim raised an eyebrow. "You're really leaning into this, aren't you?" Teresa shrugged. "You said she didn't exist. I proved you wrong." Ariona smiled. "She's quite persuasive." Jim nodded. "She gets that from her mother." They ate cookies and talked about constellations, about the physics of interstellar travel, about the strange similarities between human and Jurasan biology. But beneath the science, something else was unfolding, something quieter, deeper. Jim wasn't just talking to an alien queen. He was talking to someone who understood loss, someone who listened, someone who didn't flinch at silence. And for the first time in years, he felt seen. Chapter 8. Stargazing. Later that night, Queen Ariona invited them aboard her ship. It hovered just above the treetops, silent and sleek, its surface rippling with soft light. Teresa's eyes widened as they stepped inside, walls of crystalline glass, floating gardens of bioluminescent flora, corridors that hummed with gentle energy. It was like stepping into a dream. Jim moved slowly, absorbing every detail. He wasn't a man easily impressed, but this was something else. Not just the technology, but the intention, the care, the beauty. They reached the observation deck, a wide platform that opened to the stars. Earth spun below them, blue and fragile, wrapped in clouds. Ariona stood beside Jim, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Your planet is beautiful," she said. Jim nodded. "It's home." She turned to him. "I won't ask you to leave it." He looked at her, surprised. "You're not here to take me away?" "No," she said. "I'm here because your daughter believed in something impossible, and because I wanted to see if it was true." Jim smiled. "And was it?" Ariona paused. "Yes. You are kind, curious, wounded but still open. You remind me that grief doesn't end us. It reshapes us." Teresa joined them, her face glowing in the starlight. "So, what happens now?" Jim looked at her, then at Ariona, then back at the earth below. "I don't know," he said, "but I think I'd like to find out." Chapter 9. Letters to the Stars. In the weeks that followed, Ariona returned often, not in grand ships, but in quiet vessels that landed behind the garage. She and Jim shared meals, ideas, and laughter. They collaborated on interstellar science. They walked in the woods. They talked about Marianne. Teresa kept sending messages, stories, poems, questions. She became Earth's unofficial ambassador of empathy. Other voices began to answer. Other beings began to listen. The telescope, once a monument to grief, became a beacon of connection. Chapter 10. The Blind Date. It wasn't blind. It was guided by love, by curiosity, by a child's belief that grief doesn't have to be the end. And somewhere in the cosmos, a queen heard a little girl's voice and answered. Jim didn't fall in love overnight, but he began to live again, to laugh, to hope, and in the quiet space between stars and backyard dinners, something extraordinary unfolded. Not a romance, not a miracle, just two beings from two worlds sharing a moment, and sometimes that's enough. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, please hit the bell icon for notifications. Thank you.